Linux on the desktop has come further than most people expected. From a niche enthusiast system to something that now powers developer machines, gaming rigs, creative studios, and even everyday laptops, the progress is undeniable. Modern distributions ship with polished installers, attractive themes, fractional scaling, Wayland sessions, Flatpak integration, driver managers, and app stores. And yet, despite all of this progress, Linux desktops still make user experience mistakes that quietly hold them back. Not because they lack power, not because they lack flexibility, but because they sometimes forget that power and flexibility are not the same thing as clarity and cohesion. One of the most persistent UX mistakes is inconsistency. On many Linux desktops, visual language shifts from app to app. You might open the system settings and see a beautifully designed GTK interface with modern spacing and clean typography. Then you open a third-party application, and suddenly you are staring at an older toolkit. Mismatched icons, different button styles, and a totally different spacing philosophy. On platforms like Windows or Mac OS, design guidelines are enforced more tightly. On Linux, toolkit diversity GTK, Qt, Electron, Java, web-based UI creates fragmentation. The result is not catastrophic, but it creates subtle friction. The user never feels like the system is one cohesive product. It feels like a collection of components assembled together. Another issue is that Linux desktops often expose complexity too early. Many distributions pride themselves on giving users control. But sometimes that control appears in places where users expect simplicity. Network configuration panels with advanced DNS toggles, display settings that expose backend terminology, audio panels that show raw device names instead of friendly labels. These things remind users that they are interacting with layers of abstraction. For power users, this is empowering. For average users, it creates hesitation. A good UX hides complexity until it is needed. Linux desktops sometimes surface it by default. Software installation is another area where the experience can feel fragmented. Depending on the distribution, you may have native package managers like apt, DNF, pacman, zypper. Then you have universal formats like Flatpak and Snap. Some apps appear twice in the store, once as a native package and once as a Flatpak. Version differences may not be clearly explained. Sandboxing behavior might affect file access in unexpected ways. For someone new to Linux, this is confusing. Even experienced users occasionally have to pause and think, which version should I install? Why does this one integrate better with my theme? Why does that one not detect my file system properly? A seamless UX would abstract away these decisions. Instead, Linux often exposes them. Then there is the issue of first impressions. Installers have improved dramatically, but post-install experience still varies widely. On some distributions, after the first boot, users are greeted with a minimal desktop and little guidance. No onboarding tour. No clear explanation of how workspaces function. No introduction to package management. The assumption is that the user either already knows or will figure it out. But modern UX design emphasizes guided discovery. When users switch from Windows or Mac OS, they carry mental models with them. If Linux desktops do not gently reshape those models, confusion follows. Default settings can also reflect developer preferences rather than user expectations. For example, some desktops disable minimize buttons by default. Others ship with aggressive workspace switching shortcuts that users accidentally trigger. Some place system tray icons in different positions depending on the environment. File managers might default to single-click to open instead of double-click or vice versa, without clearly explaining the choice. Each of these decisions may be defensible. But collectively, they create unpredictability. Predictability is comfort. Comfort is retention. Another subtle UX mistake lies in terminology. Linux desktops frequently use technical language in user-facing contexts. Words like repository, daemon, mount, x11, Wayland, display server, kernel module, and session appear in places where average users simply want to change a setting or install an app. On mainstream platforms, technical concepts are hidden behind friendly phrasing. Linux sometimes assumes a baseline level of technical literacy that not all users have. That assumption narrows its audience. The update experience is another mixed bag. Some distributions push frequent updates that require restarts without clearly explaining why. Others rely heavily on command line updates, even though graphical tools exist. Notifications can be inconsistent. In some cases, system updates and app updates are handled by separate mechanisms. In a world where users are accustomed to unified update centers, this fragmentation feels dated. Updates should be seamless, predictable, and trustworthy. Linux sometimes achieves this, but not consistently across distributions. Hardware integration remains a challenge. While support has improved enormously, users occasionally encounter missing drivers, partial touchpad gestures, inconsistent high DPI behavior, or power management quirks. Even when workarounds exist, the fact that they require manual tweaking undermines the experience. UX is not just about visuals, it is about trust. When something as basic as sleep mode behaves unpredictably, users lose confidence in the platform. Settings organization is another area where UX friction appears. On some desktops, system settings are beautifully categorized and searchable. On others, similar options are scattered across multiple panels. Display scaling might be in one section, fractional scaling in another, font scaling somewhere else. Keyboard shortcuts might be partly in the window manager settings and partly in a separate utility. This fragmentation reflects the modular nature of Linux development, but to users, it feels like inconsistency. A unified, logically structured control center is critical for usability. Customization, often celebrated as Linux's greatest strength, can paradoxically become a UX weakness. Many desktops allow deep theming, extensions, widgets, and layout changes. But heavy customization can lead to instability or visual breakage. Extensions may not be compatible with new versions. Themes may not style every application consistently. When users experiment and something breaks, the recovery path is not always clear. Good UX supports customization without compromising stability. Linux desktops sometimes blur that line. Error messaging is another persistent issue. When something goes wrong, Linux applications sometimes present cryptic dialogues or logs instead of actionable guidance. A failed package installation might produce a dependency conflict message that makes sense to developers but not to casual users. A graphics driver issue might display a generic warning without steps to resolve it. Effective UX turns errors into teachable moments. It explains what happened, why it happened, and what can be done next. Linux occasionally stops at what happened. Documentation culture also influences UX. Linux has extensive documentation, but it is often external. Wikis, forums, GitHub issues, community blog solutions are scattered. While this ecosystem is powerful, it requires initiative. A truly refined desktop experience integrates help directly into the system. Contextual help, inline explanations, guided troubleshooting, these features are still unevenly implemented. Discoverability of features is another area where Linux desktops stumble. Many powerful capabilities exist, such as tiling shortcuts, workspace management gestures, or advanced window snapping, but users are not always made aware of them. If a feature is not discoverable, it might as well not exist. Modern UX design emphasizes subtle hints, onboarding flows, and progressive disclosure. Linux desktops sometimes rely on the user reading documentation or exploring menus manually. Visual polish also varies. While some desktops look stunning out of the box, others feel dated. Icon sets may be incomplete. Animations may be inconsistent in smoothness. Dark mode support might not extend to every application. These inconsistencies may seem minor individually, but together, they influence perception. Users judge quality subconsciously. Smooth animations, consistent shadows, aligned padding, these details communicate care. When they are uneven, users sense it. Accessibility is another area that needs consistent attention. Screen readers, high contrast modes, keyboard navigation, and scaling options exist. But their integration differs across environments. Accessibility should not be an afterthought. It should be a first-class design priority. Linux has the technical foundations, but the polish and integration can be uneven. Cross-distribution fragmentation also affects the UX indirectly. Because there is no single Linux desktop, developers must account for multiple environments. This leads some app developers to prioritize cross-platform toolkits that may not integrate perfectly with any one desktop. The result is a layer of abstraction that sometimes sacrifices native feel for compatibility. While understandable, this compromises cohesion. Another UX mistake is assuming that choice always equals value. Linux offers multiple desktop environments, window managers, display servers, packaging systems, init systems, and more. Choice is powerful, but it can overwhelm newcomers. Without clear recommendations, users may struggle to decide which distribution or desktop is right for them. A smoother UX would guide users towards sensible defaults rather than presenting a buffet without context. Even small details matter. Clipboard behavior can vary between apps. Drag and drop may behave inconsistently between toolkits. File chooser dialogues may look different depending on the app. These micro-interactions shape daily experience. When they are inconsistent, users feel friction without necessarily understanding why. Performance perception also influences UX. Linux is often fast, but when animations stutter or compositors misbehave, the contrast between expectation and reality is jarring. Smoothness is not just about raw speed. It is about consistency. Even minor frame drops can make a system feel less refined. Security prompts can also be confusing. Pocket dialogues may appear with minimal context. Users may be asked for administrative passwords without a clear explanation of what is being authorized. Security UX should balance transparency with clarity. If users do not understand why they are granting permission, they may either blindly approve or become anxious. Despite all these criticisms, it is important to recognize that many Linux desktops are improving rapidly. Projects are investing in design teams, user research, and usability testing. But the core challenge remains cultural. Linux grew from a developer-centric ecosystem. Its UX decisions often reflect engineering values: modularity, transparency, configurability. Mainstream UX design, however, prioritizes clarity, empathy, and guided simplicity. Bridging that cultural gap is ongoing work. The irony is that Linux has the ingredients for exceptional UX. Its modular architecture allows innovation. Its communities are passionate. Its openness encourages experimentation. The challenge is aligning these strengths with cohesive design philosophies. Consistency, predictability, discoverability, and thoughtful defaults matter as much as flexibility. Ultimately, the UX mistakes Linux desktops still make are not fatal flaws. They are growing pains of a platform that evolved from hobbyist roots into a mainstream contender. The question is not whether Linux can compete. It is whether it can unify its power with polish. When Linux desktops embrace simplicity without sacrificing control, hide complexity without removing capability, and prioritize empathy alongside engineering, they will not just be powerful alternatives. They will be compelling first choices. And perhaps the most important shift is mindset. UX is not decoration layered on top of functionality. It is functionality. Every click, every dialogue, every animation communicates intent. Linux desktops have already proven they can innovate technically. The next frontier is emotional experience, making users feel confident, guided, and understood. When that happens consistently across distributions, Linux will not just be respected. It will be loved.